the most popular part is disclosure. But as we've discussed, it's not only disclosure, it's beyond disclosure. And here what I'm trying to do, or what I would like to do with you now, this exercise, we go through these topical standards and we understand what is actually beyond these standards, these requirements, these disclosure requirements. So if you remember, we report on these metrics. For example, when it comes to climate change, we do report on scope 1, 2, and 3. We do report on emission, energy consumption. We do report on type of or the source of energy, and the goals and climate targets and adaptation and mitigation. Well, why is that? Because we look at the EU Green Deal, what is beyond reporting. Well, the ambition is by 2030 to have 55% reduction, and by 2050 to have a carbon neutrality. Therefore, this is basically the ultimate goal behind the climate aspect. For you, as if you're interested in a career in climate change, or if you feel like you have an unfair advantage or strength when it comes to climate, then it is beneficial to look into these frameworks. They might be part of your interview question, and they also would be really beneficial for you. So if you are interested in a climate related career, it would be great to look into the TCFD, Greenhouse Gas Protocol, Transition Plan Task Force, Science-Based Target, definitely essential, and IPCC provide really great research studies and can be really helpful to look into. Therefore, these are aspects to consider. What do I mean when I say climate careers? Well, there's no shortage in opportunities when it comes to this space, because there's opportunities under each of the dimensions. When we talked about the ESG dimensions, the strategy roles, there's the net zero strategist or sustainability officers sometimes that integrate climate targets into overall business strategies or set up a long-term transition plan to renewable energy. Therefore, this is a strategy role when it comes to reporting. ESG controllers, which isn't specifically for climate change, rather for all the aspects here, manages emissions here and energy data, manages other kind of data collection along the pollution, water, etc. But there's ESG analyst that is maybe specifically for KPIs such as the scope 1 and 2 and 3. Emissions, maybe practice roles or roles under practice pillar or dimension are something like energy managers. Energy managers have a huge advantage here when it comes to climate specific roles. When it comes to supply chain procurement, these are parts of scope 3 emissions reduction. Therefore, you can either shift into sustainability or ESG specific role, or you can granify your current role as well. Just start by becoming more involved in these tasks. Ask for these to be involved in these tasks, such as start with the emissions. For example, if I were a procurement manager who interested in an ESG career, I would first off start with asking to become part of the ESG reporting when it comes to scope 3. Understand the goal behind it, how we're trying to achieve the targets, and how we are involving our suppliers. That would be a great starting point, for example. We have seen that the ambition behind the ESRS E1 to report on that is basically the climate neutral by 2050. But what does that mean to business? That means that they need to set science-based targets to align with the global climate goals or the EU Green Deal. They need to transition to renewable energy sources. That requires a transition plan, and they need to decarbonize their operation as well as their value chain. Therefore, it's clear how this is basically working. Now, if we look into pollution or ESRS2 and to understand what is beyond that, well, first off, the target is to achieve a toxic-free environment by 2050. And this is the EU Green Deal ambition. And to reduce the air pollution by 55% by 2030 is kind of the milestones here, and major cuts in plastic and microplastics. Well, what does this mean to business? This means that they need to monitor and reduce pollution across their operation. Therefore, this is not just reporting, rather before reporting you need to measure for sure and try to reduce to be able to improve over time. Transition to sustainable material and to manufacturing or sustainable manufacturing processes. This is another part that is really important when it comes to pollution. And this is, if you are working as part of an ESG team or a sustainability team that focuses on pollution, these are kind of your ultimate goals to achieve toxic-free environment, toxic-free production, toxic-free manufacturing process that uses sustainable materials. Therefore, you should be familiar with, for sure, these KPIs, emissions. You need to be able to measure these aspects, these values, and you need to be able to focus on hazardous substances and chemical releases, water and soil pollution levels, and also it depends on the industry. That's going back to materiality assessment again. Materiality assessment will basically say that your industry is high in pollution and we need to focus on 1, 2, 3, 4, and the sustainability team would need to look into these aspects. And when it comes to understanding what frameworks and that will help you here is basically greenhouse gas protocol for sure, and the industrial emission directive. This is a directive that also steer the discussion when it comes to pollution. If we look into the career path for people who are interested in pollution, well, you might be a chemical engineer that works or focus on pollution control aspects, develop and implement technologies to minimize the emissions. You might be focused on water rather than air, water and wastewater effluent. You might be environmental compliance specialist. Therefore, there's a list of career opportunities that actually belong to pollution, basically. Therefore, that would be great to look into it. And people working or professionals working in under pollution, there might be data stream owners or project managers, and they are or both at the same time. Therefore, there's a huge amount of variety when it comes to these aspects. You can see here it might be in product development when it comes to manufacturing that reduce the amount of hazardous materials that in the packaging, for example. Or you can be an EHS officer, water efficiency engineer that ensure that the wastewater effluent is low in specific pollutants based on your industry. Therefore, there's a huge amount of opportunities out there, and these are the aspects you need to be familiar with, kind of industrial emissions directives, and these are the KPIs we are talking about. Well, now jumping to the next actually with the water and marine resources, or ESRS E3, and here we can see that the goal is to protect marine biodiversity and ensure sustainable water use. Basically, you can see the target here: sustainable fishing, ship recycling, marine biodiversity protection, reducing emissions by promoting offshore renewable energy, and decarbonizing maritime activities. There's a huge list under the Sustainable Blue Economy Initiative under the EU Green Deal. What does that mean to businesses? And again, here for climate change, it's more of a generic topic that's similar for all businesses, that we need to ensure that we are shifting to renewable energy, decarbonize, and so on. When it comes to pollution, water, biodiversity, and circularity, it's more of sector-specific, business-specific. Therefore, this is why it's important to have an expertise in a specific industry. Will give you an advantage if you are looking for a career in relevant topics such as pollution or water and marine resources. Therefore, businesses need to reduce the water use, ensure the pollution is from their operation is less. If we are talking about a business that depends on fishing, they should be promoting sustainable fishing. They need to make sure that they are ensuring, for example, some that are sourcing materials that might harm the water or the life underwater. They need to ensure that these materials are sourced responsibly. Now, if we look into what do we actually report, we are reporting the water withdrawal, water consumption, the discharge, quality and volume, impact on marine and ecosystem, which is really dependent on your industry. Therefore, different career opportunities might be possible here: environmental engineer or wastewater treatment specialist, etc. But there are different frameworks, regulations, especially in Europe when it comes to EU framework, Water Framework Directive, Wastewater Treatment Directive. The World Resource Institute can be helpful. GRI, the part that covers water, ISO 146 on a water footprint. So these are kind of the frameworks and directives that you need to look into if you are looking career in this part. Well, now let's talk about biodiversity, which is aligned with the ESRS E4. Here, biodiversity isn't just about saving cute animals or protecting rainforests, although that's important too, but it's about maintaining the ecosystem that underpin everything: our food, water, our climate, stability, everything. So the EU Green Deal here has a bold target here. You can see protecting 30% of land and sea with enhanced biodiversity, restore ecosystems through nature restoration plan, integrate biodiversity into decision making. So for businesses, they need to integrate biodiversity into decision making. Companies must evaluate how their operations impact ecosystems and embed biodiversity consideration into their strategies. Avoiding practice that harms ecosystem. And again, as I've mentioned earlier, when it comes to biodiversity as well as water pollution and circularity, it's really dependent on the industry and the business also on the location here. We are talking about biodiversity sensitive areas that need to have a specific consideration, and therefore this is really dependent. However, for you need to understand what we are reporting on: protecting the habitat, species, land use metrics such as deforestation, reforestation, afforestation, impact on protected areas. So therefore, there should be a risk assessment that says that we are operating in this area that is close this kilometers from a biodiversity or a specific species. Therefore, this is something that is really dependent to understand more, and these sources are really useful, especially for the TNFD, which is gaining a huge traction recently. Convention on Biological Diversity in WWF is doing a great work here, and there's a ton of research studies and case studies and documents that you can for free access when it comes to WWF. Therefore, this is an essential, a huge, very important resource that you need to take seriously if you are interested in biodiversity, and if your background is actually giving you an advantage here. This is really becoming a thing, and it's taking a center stage in the coming years. Well, some possible position would be a biodiversity officer, someone who oversees the initiatives that protect and restore ecosystem. This would be if a business is actually operating in a specific area that requires. But before that, a sustainability manager might be responsible to perform a risk assessment on specific locations that a business actually is manufacturing or is doing business. Another position would be sustainable sourcing manager. Is important here because sourcing materials that do not harm or do not contribute to forestation. This is something big and will be bigger in the coming years with the EU deforestation regulation coming up. Therefore, this is also interesting. Environmental compliance specialist would be something. There are different positions, and here you can access this, look into. Well, lastly, let's dive into the concept of circular economy, which is tied to the ESRS E5. Well, this topic isn't about recycling only, or actually is against recycling. I would say there are different stages before recycling that need to be visited. That's something else. You don't want to dive deeper into this, but the goal here is to move away from the traditional linear economy, which is take, make, and waste. Rather, now we need to embrace a circular model that resources are reused, regenerated, and kept into the loop as long as possible. And the EU here is targeting, as you can see here, sustainable product design, cutting waste by 50% by 2030, decoupling growth from resource use. And here there are really different regulations beyond disclosure. We have regulation that specifically look into product level. Therefore, it's never about reporting, it's beyond reporting. Businesses play a really crucial part here, so they need to rethink their product design. They need to make sure that their products are durable, repairable, and recyclable. Think of it for a life cycle, the whole life cycle of the product, and not just producing, just sent to the market. They need to optimize resource use. They need to create reverse logistics systems that actually adapt to the new circular economy plan. Reduce their reliance on virgin materials is important as well, or try to integrate reused and recyclable materials into the system. And if we're talking about the metrics presented earlier, but it's resource efficiency of material, metrics on recycled and reused materials, circular economy initiative. Here you can look into the Eco Design Directive. Is one possible directive that can help you, and you need to, if you are looking for a job and the resources used in circular economy, you must be familiar with this part. The right to repair, this is also under the EU Green Deal, and then we have the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, which provide really tons of resources here that you can look into. While career can be clear that it's a circular economy specialist or someone who's into the research and development of products. If we are looking at the products stage or the design stage, someone working on the waste initiative or reverse logistic initiative. These are also possibilities that are career possibilities around the circular economy.